Hello, I'm Lauren Weingarten, and I'm sharing with you a paper that I presented to the 12th International Conference of the International Association of Word and Image Studies. And I will start sharing my screen with you. Okay. The conference theme was Water and Sea in Word and Image. It was hosted by University of Luxembourg, and it was a virtual conference held on 12th to the 16th of July 2021. The title of my paper is Hijacking the Seine, Stephane Thidet's Detournement. And please do not copy or quote from this presentation without permission from me, the author. At the invitation of France's National Monuments Center, artist Stephane Thidet designed an installation artwork for the conciergerie titled Detournement, which was exhibited for 5 months in 2018. For this installation artwork, the artist created a partial diversion of the River Seine into the medieval building, the conciergerie. By way of introduction, I invite you to view this video. It's a run through of the installation with a very short interview with the artist. And you can access it by clicking on this video camera icon. The artist's website describes Detournement, the Seine River's path from the riverbed through the building and its return to the river. Quote, "The water for the installation was pumped up from the Seine at the base of the nearby bridge, the Pont au Change, before passing over the street and entering the medieval monument, the conciergerie, through the former kitchens, and it then flowed into the Salle des Gendarmes as a waterfall. Next, it snaked through the Gothic columns, guided by an untreated wooden structure, a little like the first roller coasters, lined with a stainless steel trough. And eventually, the river water exited between the building's twin stone towers, once again as an 8-meter-high waterfall." This description of Detournement is deceptively simple, suggesting that the artwork's function is entirely entertainment, like a roller coaster. However, as I will show, Detournement is an extraordinarily complex construction, both technologically and thematically. I begin with a brief note on the technology, the details of which are kept secret, while I subsequently focus on the artwork's explicit and implicit themes. Technology. To realize his project for diverting the Seine through what the National Monuments Center called an elaborate technical device, Thidet invited Michel Armand, trained as a creative engineer and ice sculptor, to provide the technical design, mechanical system, and implementation of this installation artwork. Armand is the founder and CEO of the Crystal Group, an organization that serves the entertainment and events sector, specializing in engineering of special effects involving water, ice, snow, and fire. Their work includes the Grand Basin Waterworks at Versailles. According to the Crystal Group website, Thidet and Armand's collaboration extended over several months of study and planning. 1 month of manufacturing in the Crystal Group workshop, which you see here, and 10 days of installation of the 200-meter channel that comprises Detournement, executed by 15 technicians. Themes. Stephane Thidet's artist statement, exhibited as wall text, provides a rich introduction to the creative inspiration and thematic concept of Detournement. In January 1910, the River Seine entered the conciergerie uninvited. Traces of the flood are still visible in a water line on one of the pillars of the Salle des Gendarmes. dated 28th of January, 1910. I have invited the water of the river to return here, to pass through, to flow between the columns of this vast room, but this time along a planned and defined course. There are several factors that led me to create this project for the conciergerie. The proximity of a strong, wild, and ungovernable element such as the River Seine was one of them. But the most significant was the fact that much of the history of this place is linked to confinement, detention, and all forms of isolation from the world. The installation thus suggests extreme communication with the outside, a project that goes beyond walls and connects with a powerful living external element. The outside world once again invites itself inside. In this paper, I interrogate the intersection of geographic and historical factors that motivated the artist in order to analyze the multivalent meanings of Detournement as both the titular artwork and the critical idiom. First, I survey the historical and topographic trajectories of the Seine and the Conciergerie as two separate tributaries or diversions that first converged in the 1910 flood and then reconverged in Thidet's Detournement. At this later point of convergence, I postulate a more subversive meaning of the installation artwork and its title, using Guy Debord's coinage of Detournement as an interventionist practice. I translate the word Detournement as hijacking. Viewing the artwork through this historical lexical lens, I track the multiple hijackings that Thidet's Detournement performs. Histories of spaces, spaces of history. The winding water trough in Detournement mirrors the Seine River's meandering topography along its 482-mile course, beginning with its source 19 miles northwest of Dijon, in northeastern France. The Seine flows north and then west through Paris and onto the English Channel. For our purposes, the 5-part topographic division of the Seine basin that dominates northern France helps us to focus on the river's midsection, the Traversée de Paris, or the Paris Waterway, also known as the Paris Basin. From the beginning of the 3rd century BC, the Paris Basin became the economic, administrative, and strategic military center of the Seine Basin. The English Channel provided settlers and invaders arriving from the North Sea access to the region. Settlements began with the Celtic Parisi tribe around 250 BCE, followed by the Gauls, who settled in the middle of the Seine, known as the Ile de la Cité, and the future location of the Conciergerie. The Paris Basin was also the site of imperial and tribal battles. In 52 BCE, the Roman army, led by Julius Caesar, conquered the Seine River and the Ile de la Cité from the Gauls, creating a settlement called Lutetia on the left bank of the Seine. In 1508, Clovis I, the first French king, invaded the Roman settlement, made Paris the kingdom's capital, and established his royal residence on the western end of the Ile de la Cité. Here's the Ile de la Cité. Here's the Ile de la Cité. And here is a detail of the palace. In the mid to late 9th century, Vikings twice navigated the River Seine to plunder Paris, succeeding the first time and failing the second. Except for 100 years when Louis XIV moved the court to Versailles, 1682 to 1789, Paris remained the administrative capital of France, and the Ile-de-la-Cité became the capital's administrative center as it remains today. Viewed in this historical context, Thidet's Detournement diverts more than the river water into the Conciergerie. As the water is pumped up from the Pont au Change and then arched over the Quai de Large embankment and narrow street to enter the medieval building, its liquid medium makes present an infinite spatial continuum and a geographical nexus that extends to the sea. Coincidentally, as the river enters the building as a waterfall and then flows through the wooden troughs, its gentle currents advance a historical dimension that intertwines with the Conciergerie. The Conciergerie from palace to prison. As noted, the Conciergerie was built as an extension of Clovis's palace known as the Palais de la Cité. During the reign of the medieval kings, the palace was extensively fortified and expanded to include the Palais de Justice, the Sainte-Chapelle, and the upper level Grande Salle or Great Hall, and the lower level Salle des Gendarmes, or the Hall of the Soldiers. In the late 14th century, Charles V transferred the royal residence to the Louvre Palace, now the Louvre Museum, while the medieval palace, the Palais de la Cité, continued to serve an administrative function and continued to serve the judiciary and French Parliament. The absentee king, Charles V, appointed a steward or concierge to administer the building, from which the Conciergerie derives its name. Notably, in 1391, part of the building was converted into a prison, important for the history of this building. Other than the Sainte-Chapelle, the lower parts of the palace are all that remain of the medieval royal residence. Thidet's Detournement channels the river's flow through three of these spaces: the kitchens, the Salle des Gendarmes, and the Salle de Garde. These three rooms were reserved for the king's guard and the staff that served the needs of the king and his family, totaling around 2,000 people. The kitchens were used to prepare meals for this entourage. Supplies would be brought up directly by boat, just as Thidet's Detournement delivers a Seine through its 5-meter high windows. The Salle des Gendarmes, composed of 4 naves with ribbed vaulting supported by Gothic piers, was one of the largest halls of medieval Europe. It was used as the staff's dining room, for royal banquets, and for judicial proceedings. Detournement makes its grand entry into this monumental room, cascading river water into a circular tank with a deafening din. And if you click on this slide, you will be able to hear the crushing sound of the water flowing down from above into the circular container and out the bottom into the aluminum-lined troughs. Channeling the water into troughs 1 meter above, 1 meter from the ground. Detournement then gently and quietly meanders through the piers and turns to enter the Salle de Garde. Built together with the Salle des Gendarmes, This guard room was an antechamber to the Great Hall above, which no longer exists. In the Salle de Gare, the river trough is elevated to the height of the guardroom's windows. From here, the river makes its grand exit as another waterfall to return by way of a moat to its river source. And again, if you click the arrow on this slide, you will be able to hear the crushing noise as the water leaves the Salle de Gare and flows back into the river. It was during the French Revolution that the Revolutionary Tribunal moved to the Salle des Gendarmes, but it was the prison that made the Conciergerie legendary in modern times. It became the central penitentiary of a network of prisons throughout Paris, both for common criminals and for political prisoners. Marie Antoinette counts as one of the notorious Conciergerie revolutionary prisoners. The two fates for those sent before the Revolutionary Tribunal were acquittal or death with no possibility of appeal. The guilty prisoners were loaded onto carts in the Conciergerie courtyard and brought to guillotines located throughout Paris, an ordeal for which the Conciergerie was nicknamed the antechamber of the guillotine. The prison's notoriety notwithstanding, Thidet's Detournement turns away from the dark corridor leading to the prison cells. As he stated in our email correspondence, I only worked in the rooms where the activity was to make the conciergerie work for the residents, the kitchen, the salle de garde, and the salle des gendarmes. I didn't want to work in the jail cells. The history and facts were too heavy, too strong to react with it, unquote. In bypassing the prison, Thidet instead attended to another, more recent historical marker inside the conciergerie. That is the 1910 flood level etched on a stone pier inside the Salle des Gendarmes. As Thidet recounted in the exhibition wall text, the invasion of the Seine River into the conciergerie during the 1910 flood became his inspiration for Detournement. The 1910 flood was catastrophic for the city of Paris. During the winter of 1909 to 1910, the Seine River water levels had risen and fallen. However, on January 21st, the river began to rise more rapidly than normal. Over the course of the following week, thousands of Parisians evacuated their homes as water infiltrated buildings and streets throughout the city, shutting down much of the basic infrastructure. To continue moving throughout the city, residents traveled by boat or across a series of wooden walkways built by government engineers and civilians. And you may notice that the structures, scaffolding carrying the wooden planks, is repeated in the shape of the scaffolding that carries the metal trough that carries the water through the conciergerie and Detournement. On January 28th, the Seine River water reached its maximum height of 8.62 meters or 28 feet above its normal level. It was on this day that the Seine River breached the conciergerie and stained the stone pier in the Salle des Gendarmes. The river receded in the following days. Word and image, Detournement as a critical framework. At this point where Thidet rejoins the Seine and the conciergerie, I offer a critical reflection upon Detournement. Guided by the artwork and its title, I turn to Guy Debord's coinage of Detournement as a practice of cultural critique and intervention to interrogate multiple meanings inferred by Thidet's rerouting the river into the conciergerie. By tracking the inferences of Debord's model, I am further guided by Thidet's response to my inquiry whether he had Debord in mind for his artwork's title. He responded, actually, I didn't directly invoke Debord with the title, even if indeed it was there as a cultural background in my mind, unquote. I like the idea of cultural background because Debord proposed that Detournement is an ongoing process that invites the reuse of cultural artifacts to create new ensembles with new meanings. Word and image, semantics, and translation. Before discussing Debord's Detournement in relation to Thidet's artwork, I review the semantics and translation of the nomenclature. According to Ken Knob, the translator of Guy Debord's text, quote, the French word détournement means deflection, diversion, rerouting, distortion, misuse, misappropriation, hijacking, or otherwise turning something aside from its normal course or purpose. Each of these terms fits Thidet's rerouting of the Seine River through the Conciergerie. However, Knob cautions against the frequent translation of détournement simply as diversion, because in his words, of diversion's more common meaning of idle entertainment, unquote, which Debord describes as spectacle, and he derides that notion of diversion as spectacle. Although Thidet's Detournement is entertaining, his diversion of the Seine also invites critical engagement with historical, cultural, and environmental discourses, the latter of which I won't have time to discuss. However, it is in this critical light that I prioritize hijacking to denote a more subjective, if not illegal, activity. To hijack is to unlawfully and forcefully intrude upon a space that is legally off limits, to seize someone or something that signifies a desired symbol of power. As Thidet stated, the most important factor leading to re-inviting the Seine into the Conciergerie was, in his words, the fact that much of the history of this place is linked to confinement, detention, and all forms of isolation from the world, unquote. I argue that Thidet's creative interventions, both conceptual and material détournements, support my interpretation of détournement as hijacking. Text, word and image. In his 1956 A User Guide to Detournement, Guy Debord introduces Detournement as an ongoing critical activity performed within and directed against capitalist cultural practices. Conceived as an agent of mutation from within a culture, Detournement is especially effective within the sphere of artistic production and appropriation. And to note, I will follow Debord and Knob's use of détournement as a noun, but also will use its adjectival and verb forms. Debord's tenets are more succinctly defined without the anti-capitalist rhetoric in his 1959 track, Detournement as Negation and Prelude. Here, Debord proposed that détournement is an ongoing process that invites the reuse of cultural artifacts into new ensembles. To differentiate détournement from the avant-garde's parodic, quote, reuse of pre-existing artistic elements in a new ensemble, Debord states, quote, the two fundamental laws of détournement, unquote. These laws are, quote, the loss of importance of each deterrent autonomous element, which may go so far as to completely lose its original sense, and at the same time, the organization of another meaningful ensemble that confers on each element its new scope and effect, unquote. How do these two laws pertain to Thidet's Detournement. First, by presenting a historical monument and water as ready-made creative materials of Detournement, Thidet's installation artwork circumvents the avant-garde's parodic inversion or appropriation of pre-existing artistic elements. Second, by reconfiguring the Seine's intrusion on the conciergerie as an artistic intervention, Thidet temporarily hijacks these two elements' original sense. Temporality is key here, since I have just probed the historical and geographical meaning of the monument in the river. Yet both Debord's Detournement and Thidet's Detournement present the deturned elements, which comprise the new ensemble, as carriers of collective memory. Debord explains, the elements and their deturning must be simply exposed. Quote, the distortions introduced in the deturned elements must be as simplified as possible, since the main impact of a detournement is directly related to the conscious or semi-conscious recollection of the original context of the elements, unquote. And as a general law, he adds, quote, let us simply note that this dependence on memory implies that one must determine one's public before devising a detournement. Like the deturned elements that operate in Debord's mutational processes, Thidet's materials, the conciergerie and the River Seine, cannot escape the spectator's collective memory. Yet his reductive presentation of both the two elements as ready-made materials and the supporting materials of wood, metal, and light renders the new ensemble with ostensible simplicity. At the same time, this simplicity highlights the mnemonic targets of Thidet's hijackings: the river, the medieval building, and the flood that caused their original collision. Thidet further invoked Debord's acts of deturning historically remembered elements in his response to my query. Quote, it was important for me to propose another story of this monument, which was a strong authority symbol and a terrible jail. Important to make something wild breaking in through the windows and going back outside. The same need we have when we open the windows to change the air of a house, unquote. And here again, you can listen to the streaming of the water inside the building. Conclusion, text and space at play. By reuniting the Seine River with the conciergerie, Thidet not only hijacks the river and medieval monument, but he hijacks the 1910 flood as well. Comparing his monumental diversion of the Seine with child's play, he wrote to me, quote, like a lot of children, I used to turn away the path of small streams with pebbles and sticks, unquote. In his Detournement, the conciergerie becomes a space for both his artistic creation and his historical intervention. Thidet's ultimate hijacking of the conciergerie is directly aligned with the Debordian definition of Detournement, that is, to turn something aside from its normal course or purpose, unquote. Within this alignment, Thidet turns the conciergerie into a stage set for a poetics of play. That is, Thidet plays with a series of opposites that flow through the course of Detournement and temporarily rid the building and the river of their historical, utilitarian, and commercial functions. These dichotomies suggest open-ended play. Open, closed, inside out, water, stone, gentle, forceful, impermeable, porous, permanence, change, stasis, movement, fixity, continuum. And so it is that Detournement invites its visitors to go forth and hijack the extraordinary and the commonplace. As Thidet responded to my paper abstract and translation of Detournement as hijacking, quote, hijack a stream, hijack a history, hijack a monument of authority, hijack a naive childhood game, unquote. And with that, I bid you au revoir, merci, c'est tout. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed.